to have a candidate to the presidential election.
Shouldn't you take responsibility if you're the biggest sort of movement to actually also step forward with a presidential candidate?
I think Egyptians need a national consensus of one candidate to have the post. It seems now that competition for this most important post is dangerous for the future of Egypt. If we can reach a national consensus and we can achieve a stable democratic system, not a chaos of democracy as in Iraq or in other places.
Could it be that you are afraid that you cannot handle the responsibility?
No, we are responsible, not now. The responsibility now is not to have posts to manage or rule the country. It is the responsibility of building a good democratic system.
Would you describe yourself as Islamist, or how would you describe the Muslim Brotherhood today?
Muslim Brotherhood is a civil organization working with the background and reference of Islam, working on all aspects of life, and of course concerned with political reform. We are professors, we are doctors, we are engineers, we are from all fields of life. This is not organization of preachers or clerks. We have, of course, some imams or some professors in Al-Azhar University, but they are ordinary members. They don't have any speciality or any specificity. We are described in all literature as a moderate group, non-violent group. We have in our history some incidents of violence, but these incidents must be examined or described in the context of the political life during the incident.
Any comments?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is an interesting thing about groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, they're essentially saying we're not going to contest power right away. And the Brotherhood has also announced that it won't seek a parliamentary majority, so they'll only contest half the total seats in parliament. So even if theoretically they want every single seat they contested, they still would have less than 50% of the parliament. And this is a way for them, at least from my own conversations with them, to allay the fears of secular groups. And it's kind of, in a way, affirmative action for liberals. So liberals, I think, are essentially, the Islamists are conceding, up to half of the parliament. So I think there really is an opportunity for other groups to kind of jump in and to fill in that vacuum. I mean, the Brotherhood is really worried about repeating Algeria 1991 or Palestine 2006. And what happened there? Islamists came to power too quickly. The international community got very nervous, and they essentially worked against these emerging democracies. And Algeria, I think, is the one that really looms large in the Islamist mindset. And when I meet with Brotherhood leaders, almost no matter what the conversation is about, they will always bring up Algeria at least once. It's really had an effect on them, because Algeria was really the most promising democratic experiment in the Arab world up until then. Islamists won in free elections, the military intervened, and the US and Europe supported the military coup. I see people shaking their heads. I'm not sure what that's about, but...
Being the most democratic country in the Arab world, I'm sorry, it's a big question mark.
Sure. But in any case, there's this question of whether or not the international community, how are countries like the US and Europe going to deal with it when groups like the Muslim Brotherhood not necessarily come to power, but what if they join a coalition government and they have some ministries? That's going to be a delicate situation, particularly in a country like Egypt that has been a close U.S. ally for such a long time. There's the peace treaty with Israel, and it's not just about Islamists. I mean, Arabs don't like Israel a whole lot, so any Arab democracy is going to be less amenable to Israeli interests or to U.S. interests. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
Stéphane Lacroix, any comments?
Yeah, just a quick word. I think also there's this idea that it's fundamentally an ideological group at the beginning, and that it's a painful process to turn into a government party, because you have to clarify your positions, you have to make choices, you have to move away from slogans. The Islamic State works when you're in the opposition, because the Islamic State is by itself a mobilizing slogan, and everyone can think that the Islamic State will be something that you will benefit from, because nobody really knows what it is. Once you're in a government, then you have to clarify your position, you have to make enemies, you have to lose part of your constituency. So that's also probably why the Muslim Brotherhood is not really eager to enter government straight away. They want this position, this moment to be delayed a little bit. I mean, and they still have a lot of things to figure out among themselves before. So I think that's also one of the reasons, in addition to their willingness to appease the West, as we said, and the fears of part of the Egyptian population towards them. The only other thing I wanted to comment on is what he says at the end, which I find interesting. He says there were a few incidents of violence in our history, but we're always a moderate group. It's really interesting. Last time I went to Egypt, I was fascinated by the amount of books on 1948, 1954, 1965, which are the three moments in the history of the Brotherhood when there was violence. And you would wonder why today people would care so much about these periods, right? On these periods you have tens of books written by, that was at the time of the Mubarak regime, half of them by Brotherhood members saying, we were not violent, we were pushed to do this, but we had nothing to do with it. The other half by pro-government people saying, look, the Brotherhood from the beginning, they had this paramilitary organization, they were planning to organize a coup, they had they call it the secret organization from the time of Hassan al-Banna. And so the whole idea is to discuss around, was violence consubstantial to the Brotherhood? Was there this kind of original sin of violence? Or was the Brotherhood pushed to violence? And again, you can see that, the historical debates today has a lot of relevance, and the Brotherhood are playing that game by producing their own books to refute accusations that they had been violent or that they had been willingly violent. So, I mean, that's still a debate, I think. In most of these cases, I would probably, as a scholar, consider that they probably were pushed to violence more than they willingly committed violence. But there were some cases where it's still, I think, to be clarified.
And we will hear more from you in a while. Your reaction, you were laughing a bit when you heard him. Remember what that was about?
يعني إشكالية الإخوان المسلمين في مصر بقى موضوع عامل زي فيلم سينمائي كل شوية لازم نتفرج عليه.
First, the form of Muslim Brotherhood started to be like a film inside the cinema. And every time we have to discuss and we have to look at this film, what they're gonna bring for us.
يعني هناك فهم أو خلط ما بين الإخوان والسلفيين الوهابيين. الإخوان أعتقد أنهم شيء والسلفيين شيء مختلف. لا يمكن أن يحدث تحول ديمقراطي في مصر أو يحدث استقرار بدون إدماج الإسلاميين في العملية السياسية.
There is misunderstanding between two parts, the Muslim Brotherhood and also the Muslim Brotherhoods and the Salafit or the Wahhabiyin. Like these people that are more fundamentals or something like that. Anyway, but if you come back to Egypt, you will see the Muslim Brotherhood are big organizations where you cannot make any democratic elections or any democratic period and any democratic regime for Egypt without them.
مصر ستكون يعني بالنسبة للعالم إما مفتاح للاستقرار في منطقة الشرق الأوسط أو مفتاح للفوضى في الشرق الأوسط.
Okay. Two keys for Egypt. It can be the key for good future or like stable Middle East inside this world for the Middle East, or the second thing can be kind of the corruptions or like the noisy and the people who will just destroy all the Middle East.
يعني أعتقد أن يعني على جميع القوى المدنية سواء في مصر أو داخل مصر عليها أن تتعامل مع الإسلاميين المعتدلين زي ما قال شادي يعني إدماجهم في الحياة السياسية هو ضرورة لضمان الاستقرار وفي نفس الوقت الفكر يواجه بالفكر. ما ينفعش نبقى احنا بنقول نحن نؤمن بالديمقراطيه ونقول له دول انتوا لا انتوا يعني اوت الديمقراطيه. فده مهم جدا في التعامل مع الاخوان.
First, for if all the civil society and all the movements, the factions inside Egypt, they have to deal with the Muslim Brotherhoods as from inside Egypt and outside Egypt even. As some people, they have to take decisions, and they have to be in a decision making period. So to mixing them, it's very important in our community. So to mix them so they don't have to be afraid. So they have to think from now, like the world and all the people outside and inside Egypt, that if we're talking about democracy, we are talking about all the parts, and we are talking about everybody. That like we have to have the act of listening, you know. So if we have to listen to all the people, from them also the Muslim Brotherhoods, to make that democracy, and we start with that because we cannot live without them.
التحدي الأساسي الآن في مصر هو تحدي للقوى المدنية، القوى المدنية الديمقراطية التي عليها أن تنظم نفسها وعليها أن تتحرك بين الناس، ويجب أن تصل للناس التي يصل إليها يعني التيارات الأخرى حتى يحدث اتزان في مصر بين قوى الإسلاميين والقوى المدنية، وهذا ما نريد أن نفعله ويعني نبذل كل وقتنا في فعله.
The main issue in Egypt now, or the main challenge for people in Egypt, or they are as a civil society, as a new political factions, and anybody who's like to make kind of staples or balance between other parties and Muslim Brotherhoods, they have to be united. They have to go to everybody in Egypt and work from that to educate all the Egyptian inside different area. So their challenge now, how they can arrive to all these factions, all this big Egypt, how they can arrive to all the faction and all the society and all the NGOs and all the association, and use that all to let all the Egyptians to be convinced with their ideas.
ولكن يعني طالما أننا نؤمن بالديمقراطية ونقول أننا ديمقراطيون، فعلينا أن يعني نناضل أيضا على حق الإخوان المسلمين في ممارسة العمل السياسي، ولا نقصي أي طرف ملتزم بقواعد اللعبة السياسية.
If we are a democracy believer, so that we have to accept Muslim Brotherhoods and we have to let them inside. So now we are accepting that, and we're trying to let other peoples and the people outside to accept the fact that Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
So it's more difficult for us here in the West to accept it than in Egypt as a liberal force.
يعني هذا بالنسبة يعني للسؤال دوت، أعتقد إن يعني طالما أننا نبذل الجهد وطالما أننا يعني نفعل ما علينا، هذا هو المهم. سيأخذ ذلك وقت، ولكن يعني التحول الديمقراطي يأخذ سنين في دول وقد ينتكس في بعض الأحيان، ولكن فكرة الإخوانوفوبيا والإسلاموفوبيا هي فكرة معيقة عن العمل. ستظل تصرخ القوى المدنية الإخوان قادمون، الإخوان قادمون، الإخوان سيحكمون مصر دون أن تفعل شيء. ونحن كجيل من الشباب وشباب الثورة لن نفعل نفس الخطأ الذي كانت تمارسه القوى المدنية التي كانت موجودة في المشهد قبل ذلك. سنفعل ما علينا، ونحن واثقون أننا سنحدث الاتزان في الحياة السياسية في مصر في فترة وجيزة.